Welcome to Dice and Mind, a podcast hosted by Brad Brown and Jason Kaufman to explore the intersection of life, games, science, music, philosophy, and creativity through interviews with leading creatives. All are welcome in this space.
I seem to say this a lot when we do episodes, and this is going to be a little bit unique in that I feel I actually said this when we had Michael Wong, our guest, on the last time. I feel a little starstruck when we have people like Michael Wong on as a guest.
Sure.
I especially feel starstruck today, having Michael and
Robert
Hazen on today.
Yeah.
So having two brilliant minds like this, I feel just, because I am not a scientist in the traditional sense of the word. These are men who are just brilliant in every sense of the word. And not only that, Dr. Hazen has musical background as well, which I can relate to. We talk a little bit about that in the episode. Michael even brings up the fact that he's got some musical background as well. We can't let that go. You have a little bit of musical well, more than a little, but you have a musical background.
Yeah.
Well, you have some musical background as well, and you've studied. But it's just, this is one of those discussions that I have been looking forward to, and we've had this scheduled for a while. I have been looking forward to for a long time, and even during the episode, I think you were cueing me to ask some questions, and I'm like, no, let's just keep going. Let him talk. There were some things I wanted to bring up, and I'm like, I don't want to digress from what we're talking about.
No, talk about a dynamic duo too, of two individuals who clearly share a mutual respect and friendship and scholarship. So so to give a little background maybe for our listeners, if you've been with Dice in Mind for the long haul, we're sorry, but you know that. Go ahead, say you got something on your tongue.
I was gonna say thanks, Brian.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah. Wait, you can hear the thump because he slips off the treadmill.
There's the treadmill sound.
Yeah.
Yep.
And at this point, Eric's probably laughing at all of us.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, and
Eric probably uses this as a drinking game. So drink up.
Every time we say something nerdy.
Yeah, by now. Well, we're what, 3 minutes in, and everyone's already intoxicated. So yeah.
So I think let's give a little background here. So if you've been listening to Dice in Mind for the long haul, or even just like the past year, you know that we are always looking to welcome guests from a real diversity of perspectives, of backgrounds, of professions. Sometimes they are deeply ensconced within the RPG landscape. For example, the next two episodes after this one are going to be deeply involved specifically with RPGs and their companies. Okay, but at other times, we really go much broader into fields that we think are RPG adjacent, and maybe some cognate areas of RPG land. Writers who don't have any interest in playing RPGs. We've had some scientists on before, right? All artists, all kinds of people. We're always looking to broaden that. Once in a while, though, there's an opportunity to bring people in who, although they might not geek out over, say, D&D, we think what they're doing and working on will be of interest to a lot of you out there listening. Because let's face it, if you are into RPGs, then there are probably a lot of other things you're into as well. If you're like Brad and me, and you're especially, but not exclusively, into sci-fi and RPGs, then you think of what we read and play in our games. Wouldn't it be cool to talk to the people doing the science, making the
Yeah.
discoveries. So that's why we reached out and were able to snag Michael Wong and Robert Hazen. And as you're going to hear in a few minutes, Bob and Mike are just like you said, Red. They're remarkable.
And I think, I'll say this. I think sometimes people um, have this, people who aren't in the sciences may have this belief that sometimes those in the sciences may be more like inaccessible. These are two of the most accessible people. If you haven't heard Michael on our show before, and he's been on twice, or is it twice?
I
Twice
think that
plus a
was his third
rerun.
time. Yeah,
Yeah,
that might be his third time.
yeah,
Yeah, have
twice,
to
two
check.
or three times plus a
Yep,
rerun.
yep.
You'll know that he's a very accessible
Mm.
and down to earth person to listen to and to talk to. Bob is the same way, and both on and off of recording, and just fascinating individuals. And for someone who doesn't have their background, I could sit and listen to them just vamp and talk for an hour in those areas of
Mm.
science that I don't have education in.
Now,
Um,
for those of you in our audience who are working scholars, who are academicians, we're using the term accessible not as an insult, but as a compliment. I'm thinking along the lines of Jorge Cham's the PhD movie Two, and your research is so accessible. But
oh,
but they really
is that like a
it.
bad word?
I mean, like tongue in cheek, but
Really?
well, there is, and I get this because I've been on both ends of this
No,
philosophy, if you
this
will.
is actually an interesting
I
before we go,
so
because in
so
the business world, accessible is actually like a compliment. But now this is
and
fascinating.
in a lot of in the academic disciplines, at least historically, being accessible would would imply, unfortunately and often erroneously, that there wasn't sophistication to the
No
research or the
insult
writing. No, well,
intended to
clearly not.
anyone.
Now,
Yeah.
that is an antiquated notion. It's funny,
Hmm.
but that is an antiquated notion. And in my own academic writing, I I seek, and it's always a challenge, but it's a joyful challenge. I seek to find a balance between being really, really logically rigorous and
Extraordinarily loquacious.
exactly. Well, hopefully not too bad, but really being rigorous in my thinking and in my writing and my explanations, and also, quote, being accessible, also writing well. Like Steven Pinker, don't put it, he has written well about this, saying, look, we need to write well. So even little things like when I was trained, uh, the encouragement was, you write everything in the third person and a lot of passive third person. And there's a time and a place for that. But increasingly, you see some of the best scientific and academic writers out there writing in much more academic and even first person voices. So for example, like in several recent papers with colleagues, like I've intentionally used second person voice of, we were seeking to,
Fascinating.
it was anticipated that. They're both really effective. Anyways, now that we've put to sleep all
No, but that's
but
fascinating because no, obviously no insult intended,
no,
but I could have very well
no, you didn't.
unintentionally
Actually,
insulted.
I'm glad we went down this rabbit hole because before we go over to the interview, so let's talk about what Bob and Mike have written because that's why we asked them to join us. So, um, I have read them both widely.
Hmm.
Now, I get a kick out of it because, we had the good fortune of having interacted a number of times with Mike Wong, and Mike and I have had many emails, and we've I've been on his show, he's been on ours. I've read many of his papers. He has a chapter in one of my books with Aaron Peterson. Um, Mike is a beautiful writer. He is one of the best science writers I know. I mean, whom I've read. right?
Hmm.
And it's just lovely. And he's young to be that solid, but he has a knack and he has excellent mentorship. Okay, enter Bob. Bob or Robert Hazen, and we actually talked about this off air, which is why I'm mentioning this. Not to embarrass him, but I first read Professor Hazen's, Dr.
1992.
Hazen's, yep, somewhere in the 90s, 90, yeah, 90. I'm guessing it's closer to 93 or 4. It's somewhere in
Probably
there.
not, probably 94, I think,
Yeah,
because it was probably after me, after
I
I had left.
think it was my sophomore year.
Yep, 93,
Yeah,
94.
very good. It's the 93, 94. And I read a book he had co-authored called Science Matters. And it was one of those rare books that really affected me. It affected my thinking to this day. It was beautifully written and so engaging, and it made it. I already knew I was going to be a scientist. Like, there was no other probably path for me than to go in the sciences in one way or another. But this was the first time I'd ever seen the sciences overall as a whole. And so before, and this has stuck with me, and I've read books like The Story of Earth, which is much, much more recent, is outstanding. So we're introducing ourselves to Bob before we click record. And I tell him, and I hold up my copy from college, which,
30 years old.
I was gonna say, not recent.
Hmm.
And his eyes open. He's like, "Wow, look at that!" And I told him what I just said, and he was very gracious. But he said, writing that book, co-writing that book, also changed his trajectory too because of what he had to learn, and it was just very, very cool. So we've got here two absolutely first-rate writers who are writing about super technical stuff.
Yeah.
And so you want to go ahead and explain the premise of the book?
Yeah, right. Go ahead.
So no, no.
Yeah, go
So
right ahead.
so Bob and Mike, as this drops, the book releases the day after this episode airs, and as this the book is uh I keep getting the name of the book backwards. Uh, the second arrow of time. Um, time. Isn't that right? I know how it is in my, I'm sorry, t Time's Second Arrow. I simply remember it wrong every time. Sorry, guys. Time's Second Arrow. And they do nothing less than propose a new fundamental law of nature.
Yes.
And we just thought that's really, really, really interesting. And they were nice enough to send us the PDF so we could read it in preparation for the discussion. And so you'll hear like we get into the weeds a little bit, but for the most part, no. It's a wonderfully provocative book. We hope you'll buy it and read it. We hope you'll enjoy this interview. And honestly, Brad and I hope that this will inspire your own role-playing game adventures, your own lit RPG writing, maybe just flights of fantasy as you're looking up at the stars or falling asleep or walking in the woods. That's really what it's all about. So, you think we should go over?
Yeah, let's go right over.
Robert M. Hazen is Senior Staff Scientist at the Carnegie Institution's Geophysical Laboratory and Clarence Robinson Professor of Earth Sciences at George Mason University. He received the BS and SM in geology at the MIT, the PhD at Harvard University in Earth Science, and was NATO Postdoctoral Fellow at Cambridge University. Michael Wong is an astrobiologist and planetary scientist whose primary scientific interests are planetary atmospheres, habitability, biosignatures, and the emergence of life. He is co-authoring a revised edition of the textbook Astrobiology, a Multidisciplinary Approach. He also hosts a podcast that examines science, technology, and culture through the lens of Star Trek. He is working with staff scientist Bob Hazen to assess the network topologies of exoplanet atmospheres for potential biosignatures. All right. Well, Bob and Mike, thank you so very much for being with us this evening. Um, yeah, we've got a lot to talk about.
Looking forward to it.
So glad to be here.
Yeah. And Mike, we haven't had a chance because you just logged in too. We haven't had a chance. How have you been since the last time we talked?
I've been good, winter break happened, spent some time with family, and now I'm back in DC working with Bob,
Nice.
trying to push science forward.
So how is I know here in Minnesota it is exceptionally cold at the moment. We're having finally our Arctic blast. How is it and pretty close I think in Milwaukee. How is it in DC?
I think it's just below freezing right now, but it's not actively snowing. It snowed a little bit yesterday and it didn't stick. And as a person who grew up in California,
Yeah.
I really still marvel at the novelty of snow because, I had to drive to the mountains multiple hours to get to the snow. For
Yeah.
snow to just land on your face in a city is still pretty new to me. So I want it to snow. I really do.
It snowed a lot more 30 years ago or 40 years ago when I was here. I remember negotiating the back streets of Washington, D.C., which were never plowed ever
Right.
anywhere. I mean, 2 inches of snow, the city was in gridlock. But there hasn't been anything like that in a while. Knock on wood, it can happen any time, but certainly
Yeah.
much less than in years and decades past.
Yeah, that is very true.
I would even argue, like, even up here, living in Wisconsin, people don't know how to drive in the snow anymore. We had about four
Oh,
inches of snow, and no, we had 4 inches of snow, and people drive here like they live in Florida, and it
Happens
is,
every year though. Every
yeah,
winter it takes people by surprise.
yeah. There's no short term, there's no long term memory when it comes to winter driving here anymore,
Yeah.
and I don't understand it.
Yeah.
So
Speaking of time, see what I did there. The
nice,
number
nice.
one reason we are chatting with you this evening is, and I have my printout because Mike was so kind to send us the PDF. I've got my times second arrow evolution order and a new law of nature, and just wow, guys. I mean, this is really, really interesting. And I'll just because our most of our listeners are not scientists. They're not necessarily science adjacent. And so we want to be careful with, how deep we go into it. But you gentlemen propose something pretty significant and I would say in a beautiful way out there. And and of the many things that really impressed me about the book was you were upfront about that, right? Like you're just very, very transparent at the beginning of the book that, this is your argument and it's not going to be 100%, but here are your conceits, and then you walk us through everything. And what I appreciated was the concision of the book. Like it's a brief book and it moves really quickly and it gets pretty abstract here and there. But yet along the way, there's some absolutely beautiful writing. And I mean, I've read a lot of both of your stuff, so that in no way surprised me, but it's just beautifully written. Like it just, it, I don't mean to be projecting here, but it almost is like a love letter to the universe, right? It just really impressed me. So
beautiful.
just
That's,
just wanna, yeah, I'll just turn it over to you guys.
it's I think everyone can understand the concept of time because we live in time. We
Mhm.
experience time. We have this concept of now and now
Yeah,
and now. And we can remember the past, we can't remember the future. And so one of the fundamental questions that Mike and I have been asking is, well, what is this nature of time? I'll tell you about the first arrow of time and let Mike describe the second one. So the first arrow is the one that I'm more familiar with because I'm older and we do go old. We age, our bodies start to deteriorate. Um, it's a quotidian thing. I've got a hot cup of tea. It's going to get cold. It's not going to get hot spontaneously. You've got a brand new pair of shoes. They get scuffed. They don't get unscuffed spontaneously. In our bodies too, we have disease, we have injuries, and eventually we're all going to die and we're all going to turn to dust and decay, and it's a bummer, and it's all part of what's known as the second law of thermodynamics, or a law of increasing entropy. And until our book came out, that increase in entropy happening through time is the only arrow of time that physicists really embrace. They said, okay, we can describe everything having to do with change through time. The scuffed shoes and the cooling cup of coffee and the fact that we grow old and die. All this can be described by one arrow of time, the increase in entropy through time. Entropy will increase. But then Mike and I started thinking, whoa, is that really, as humans living in an incredible world, is that the only era of time we experience? So Mike, what'd we say?
Well, I come at this from the lens of somebody extraordinarily curious about the universe. And as an astrobiologist, the particular phenomenon in the universe that I'm very interested in is life, life on Earth, life beyond Earth. How does life arise? How do we distinguish life from non-life? And clearly, the universe has gone from something that was pretty homogeneous into something that is full of galaxies and stars and planets. And on certain planets, at least one, life has evolved. And, there's been a lot of writing and thought and ink spilled on this idea of the relationship between complexity and life and evolution and entropy and how those concepts all sort of mingle with one another. But the idea that, okay, we have this one law of thermodynamics, the second law of thermodynamics, which gives us our arrow in time, which only describes how closed systems tend toward disorder, seemed that, that seems to be missing something really big about the way the universe operates, especially when you try to get into the nitty gritty of how does life originate in the first place? How does this marvelous complex system come into existence? And so, we wrestled with this for quite a long time. But we settled on the idea that life is just one of many, many kinds of evolving systems in the universe, that we can cast with a much broader brush this idea of evolution that extends not just to living things, but also to all kinds of abiotic systems. And I think here's where I'll turn it back to Bob, because for decades, before he met me, Bob has been thinking about this concept of mineral evolution and is an expert mineralogist.
So this was because I began thinking with colleagues about the origin of life. And the origin of life is a transition of sorts from the chemistry that planets do in a prebiotic sense to the chemistry that life does. So from geochemistry to biochemistry. And we said, okay, now how does this work? So you have to have some kind of chemical process. And we did various experiments that didn't get us very far until we started adding minerals to the mix. And when we added certain kinds of minerals, we got some explosions of interesting chemistry that could have been part of life's origins. So one of my colleagues said, well, oh, that's great. You're using minerals, but was a certain mineral, clay minerals. He said, were they present at the time that life arose? In other words, were clay minerals present in this period of Earth's history called the Hadean Eon? And as a mineralogist, my jaw dropped. It may seem like a trivial question to most people, but as a mineralogist, it suddenly struck me no one had ever asked the question, believe it or not, of was particular mineral X present on Earth at a particular time? Why? We just sort of assumed that the minerals had always been there. But that's simply not true. No one had ever asked, as far as I can tell, the question, what was the very first mineral that is a crystal in the cosmos? After the Big Bang, there weren't any minerals right at the beginning. It was much too hot and dense. And then there were stars, but there weren't any minerals in the stars because they were too hot. You wouldn't have any crystals. So these are the kinds of questions that no one had asked. And when my colleague asked me this, I suddenly said, oh my gosh, we have to think about mineralogy in an entirely new way. Think about minerals as an evolving system. And it was clear from the Big Bang, you start with, protons and neutrons, and they start making atoms, elements, and then stars start making more elements, and you start building layer upon layer upon layer of complexity. Then the stars explode and they make planets, and planets start getting layer upon layer of complexity. And then life comes up, and life starts making layer upon layer of complexity. And now, working with Mike and others, we start seeing all of these kinds of evolving complex system as a single progression of our universe, a universal property of where we are in the cosmos. And that led us to thinking about, is there a lawful description of evolving systems that doesn't follow simply from the second law of thermodynamics, that doesn't follow from entropy increasing?
Right. So when we talk about evolving systems, anything really can be an evolving system as long as it satisfies three main attributes or properties. So first, it has to be composed of many interacting components. Second, it has to have ways of generating many different combinations or configurations of those components. And then finally, it has to experience selection for function. Some of those configurations will fall away and others will be selected for and persist. And so you can see this immediately in minerals, right? Minerals are made up of different combinations of different structures of atoms from the periodic table. Yeah, and planets are basically engines of creation, of diversity in terms of minerals, right? They subject their planetary materials to different pressure and temperature and composition regimes, and in each of those, different minerals arise. But then many combinations are tried, but only few persist in the sense that they last for billions of years and that we can pick them up and observe them in a rock today. This also encapsulates Darwinian biological evolution. You know what Charles Darwin described when he described the origin of species. You have many different variations, and then natural selection takes over. And we think that this general framework of evolution applies to a whole suite of things that cross the living non-living divide. We can even extend it perhaps to the evolution of language and technology, artificial intelligence these days. And so as
Music.
long as yeah, and music as well, yes.
I just have to say it's a rare thing for Brad and me to be this silent for an extended period of time. I think we're both.
Ever, ever.
I think we're both enwrapped. Let me ask you both a question, and I don't. I mean, to me, it's not out of left field, but it betrays my background and interests. As I was reading this, and especially as listening to you, Mike, enumerate again the kind of criteria, right, to qualify. Because I read this. Oh wow, I read this in November. Like in a couple days. Like I honestly could not put this down. But I wonder about the implications to like where you were going, real high order phenomena like cognition, like consciousness, right? I mean, everything you're saying based on the best evidence, seems to potentially at least overlap with what we know about brain function. And I don't mean going hardcore neuroscientific, where we are probably inappropriately looking at modules and whatnot, really being narrow, but on the scope of things, that evolution and that dynamism. And I'm just curious if you two have given any thought to these ideas and this argument going in that direction.
Sure, because a brain is composed of billions and billions of neurons, which are complexly interconnected.
Mhm.
So you have lots of different configurations,
Yeah.
and the brain, especially with the electric signaling, if you want to think of that as the kind of dynamic part that's we're right now we're thinking about in all these different possible concepts and ideas. I'm trying to use a set of words that will convince you and your listeners that
Mhm.
we're not crazy. And there's some combinations of words that I could use, and they'd say, "Boy, this guy's crazy." And there are other combinations, a fewer, I'm afraid, that would lead them to think, "Oh, maybe there's really something there." So the brain is doing that right now. And so there's this process of trying new configurations, new combinations of words, and new combinations of electrical impulses in the brain. And then we select in various ways, in throughout our lives, our brains can imagine all these different configurations, and our lives, in fact, are a tracking of those possible configurations, many of which we select in advance because we can imagine some will work pretty well and some aren't so good.
Yeah, yeah.
You're choosing the right words, by the way. Your brain
Oh,
is.
Well,
No, you're choosing the right
I
words because
will.
it's
So
not
hold-
crazy.
actually, on that note, because I'm not gonna put you on the spot, Bob, because we're not a scientific podcast officially, but for all the words you want to say or the ideas you want to share but aren't, because a good scientist is careful. I want to read something from your book, just a couple sentences here, because I have a few things that there were three different passages that I marked down where they just stopped me and I reread them, but I was so impressed with this, and I am Well, I won't give it a proviso. I'll just read this because I just thought it was so remarkably open. Um, and I say this as someone who is not a person of faith, but who I would consider myself deeply spiritual and very much values the history from where I come from. And any human history is inexplicably bound up with belief for good, bad, and another. But toward the end of the book, just indulge me for these few beautiful sentences. And I quote, "Science has long presented us with a mechanistic world rather than a world of purpose. But why can't it be both? Why can't the natural, lawful, generative forces of the universe also produce a cosmos alive with meaning and contextual relational value? These are aspects of the universe that we all know, feel, and experience, but which science is only beginning to comprehend." I mean, gentlemen, mic drop.
Yeah. Those words come, I believe, in a point in the book where we're talking about whether or not this idea of selection for function, and you say function, your mind immediately flits to ideas of value and meaning and purpose. I mean, the function of a heart is to pump blood, right? And so another way of saying that is my heart has a purpose to keep me alive, to do this biological function. And we've gotten lots of questions over the past couple of years, both about our scientific papers and about the talks that we've given in various venues about this idea of, are you implying that we can scientifically address value, meaning, and purpose? And what is the relationship between those and spirituality? And Bob, wrote in the book some really, really important passages about the need to understand the laws of nature, whether you are a believer in a higher creator or not. Either way, it's important for you to understand those laws.
Yep.
And I was so grateful that we were both on the same page about needing to include something like that. For me, as a science communicator, I get a little bit uncomfortable when other science communicators immediately dismiss religion as like a hypothesis they don't need to contend with. And that to me is extraordinarily alienating. I'm not particularly religious myself, but I know that it can be alienating to a wide majority of human beings on this planet who are religious. And to say that, your religion is not needed here, we're doing science, um, is not welcoming. And as a science communicator who does want to welcome everybody into the fold and tell everyone on earth, religious, spiritual, or neither, that science is important for your life. It was so important to me that we wrote about this and that we tackled this question head on of functional information and what that has to do with, if at all, purpose in your life.
I think the whole idea of time's second arrow is that there seems to be a process, and you can think of it as very mechanistic,
Mhm.
a kind of ratcheting of possibilities, a process that leads to increased order, increased possibilities, and that's very exciting. We've had emails from people who said, "Thank you for proving the existence of God." We've had emails from other people who said,
Wow.
"Thank you for disproving the
Yeah.
existence of God." These are extrapolations which we have not made. But
Yeah.
as Mike suggested, I do feel very strongly, if you are an individual who believes in a creator,
Wow.
if that is a firm faith of yours, whatever that name creator means to you, then the best way to know the creator is to look at creation and understand the laws of nature, because that's the mechanism by which creation comes about. So if you believe in a creator, you should study science. You should study the laws of nature.
Yeah.
And by the same token, if you absolutely are an atheist, you have no belief whatsoever in a creator, then the only thing you have that's really governing your life in terms of the physical existence are the laws of nature. They tell the laws of motion, the laws of gravity, the laws of electricity and magnetism, the laws of energy, and we think the laws of information
Mhm.
are basically the rules. That's the rule book, and that's all you have. So you better be a scientist and understand those rules, because you don't got nothing else.
Mhm. Win-win.
Yeah.
Amongst the, I grew up watching Sesame Street, and there was a little like snippet on Sesame Street where they had like things on the screen, and it was one of these things are not like the other. And so if we were to use that, and amongst the four of us here, I'm the one of these things that's not like the other.
That's
I'm
probably, yeah.
I'm the one that's not the scientist. My background is more business, and then before that it was music. But that being said, I like to consider myself what I would call probably an armchair scientist. So thanks to
I think you're
Jason.
qualified. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I asked this just because as you talk about it, and I read through this back in November as well when Michael read this, and it still fascinates me as, like I said, not someone who's educated in science, but as someone who's fascinated by it and studies business, because you mentioned AI as an example, and this permeates this idea of of order and everything like that. I don't think, and maybe this is more a comment instead of a question, and maybe just, and then I'll open the floor. I don't think
See,
this
you
should be
fit in
dis.
perfectly at a scientific conference, but go
I
on.
know that. Yeah, I know. I don't think this should not be dismissed by anyone outside of the science community, because this permeates, it'll permeate areas of business, it'll permeate areas of music, it'll permeate everywhere. And this is something that Jason and I have talked about, even as myself as a leader in business, who leads people, in how we interact with each other and how we interact with other communities and other organizations, and how we interact with, me working in a business world that interacts with science where I worked. So, just a comment out there for the folks that listen that may not necessarily be scientists, but need to understand that this is broader than just science as a word.
To pivot a little bit, because I know one of the other things Brad and I wanted to get into with you two. Um, I'm I'm not gonna. In the back of my mind, I am dying to ask both of you your thoughts on the law of increasing order as opposed to the potential heat death of the universe. Instead, because that won't be all that provocative for our audience, instead, I'm wondering if we could talk nuts and bolts for a second in terms of the writing. We talk a lot on Dice and Mind, Brad and me, and a lot of our guests, because so many of them are writers or creators in another way. We like getting into the nuts and bolts of like the process of it. What was it like? Mike, we've done this with you before, right? And vice versa. And it's fascinating to us, what that looked like. And I'm curious for the two of you. I mean, obviously, Bob, you're really well published, very widely read, and yet this is a different book than what's come before. And like you both said, this is a heck of an argument. And I'm curious, nuts and bolts, like how did you pitch something like this? Was it difficult to convince people, agents, editors, or was there a recognition? Oh, that's actually pretty interesting on the face of it. Like, what was that journey like?
I'll go
Wow.
very quickly and then I'll turn it over to Bob, because from my perspective, I'm an up and coming early career academic. It's been my dream for a long time to write a popular science book.
Right.
And one day, Bob comes into my office and says, "Would you like to write a book?" And of course, I said yes.
Mike's
And
like,
then I leaned on
"Mm."
Bob's expertise in the industry, his connections with agents and editors. And so, from my perspective, it was a no-brainer. Bob Hazen was giving me this opportunity to co-author a book with him, and I was just all in. But Bob, why don't you tell the rest of the story?
Well, I think this all goes back to when Mike organized the first of our Zoom sessions during COVID, where it wasn't just the two of us. We had three philosophers of science. We had a theoretical physicist. We had one of the key people in the origin of life field in planetary science, and an information scientist. And we sat down, and week by week, Mike organized this, and we'd read papers, and we discussed them and tried to, and the foil was, is the second law of thermodynamics enough? Can we just say entropy explains everything in terms of what the change we find in our lives?
Mhm.
I had very, very strongly felt it didn't, but I wasn't smart enough to, excuse me, debate all the physicists that
Yeah.
have really been pursuing this for more than half a century
Yeah.
and have very, very strong held opinions, and no doubt would if given a chance on your podcast, say negative things about our ideas. But I just honestly felt there was something different, and there is a kind of poetic quality to this idea that even as religions have talked about good and evil and how yin and yang and this idea of opposites, in our lives we experience two arrows of time. We experience that increase in entropy. We experience the bad things. We experience irreversible moments. And I mean things even just like saying something nasty that you immediately wish, oh my gosh, I wish I didn't say that. And it will haunt you for your life that you said something to someone you never should have, and you can't take it back. And that's just part of life. That is just something we have to experience. And that's this increase in entropy that you can do destructive things. But at the same time, I mean, we all experience moments of great exhilaration and joy when we see the birth and the growth and the learning of our children. We see, every spring the flowers come out. In Minnesota, I mean, what a miracle! It's been cold, it's been frigid, and yet every year the leaves come into bloom and the birds start singing. And these are things we all experience. And I don't see that. I've just never been able to fit that into the paradigm of, oh, it's all an increase in disorder.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't feel like an increase in disorder, even though entropy is always in play. Anytime, if a bird sings, entropy increases because the bird is using energy. And when you use energy, entropy increases, energy dissipates out into space. But that doesn't explain to me why the bird sings,
Right.
nor why, how it is that our children grow and learn, and all the miraculous order and complexity and fascinating processes that we see around us, including our own conscious minds thinking up this stuff. The science itself is an evolving system, and I just simply cannot accept that there's only one arrow of time. So that's a compelling thing to say. We wrote it down, and other people said, "Yeah, that's compelling. We need to publish this book." And we had several publishers that were very eager to publish it, and
I have to say, writing a book too is an evolving system. Yeah, well, now we have a book, but long before it ever arrived physically in our hands, it went through many iterations and a lot of debates about how long should it be. And then we worked with a brilliant editor, Jessica at Norton, who really just helped shape our narrative, make sure the chapters were the right length and in the right order. And as with anything, it's going to undergo a lot of changes. Many people are going to have different opinions about the way things should flow. But what I realized as I was literally writing and editing this book and playing around with the content is, wow, this is a great example of evolution in action. Many people are contributing different ideas for how the configurations of the words in this book should be organized. And we're going to work out which is the best configuration for the purpose of this book. And actually writing this book has completely changed the way that I feel whenever I get feedback, constructive criticism from anybody, really. It's so easy to curl up into a little ball and feel very defensive when somebody suggests an alternative route for something that you've poured countless hours into and feel like, this is my baby. And then somebody says, no, it's all wrong, or not all wrong, but, parts of it need improvement. And I used to get a little bit defensive whenever I got feedback like that. But the process of working on this book and realizing that getting edits on something is actually just somebody trying to increase the combinatorial possibility space for you and your group to eventually select the best possibility is just, it's wonderful. It's a beautiful thing. And so I eagerly await feedback now. I want to see all the combinatorial possibilities that people suggest.
That's awesome.
I've got to add one thing to this. I've written more. I'm older. I've written more books than Mike. He's younger. Mike is a brilliant writer. He is going to write lots of books on his own. I can't wait to read his first single author book, but it will be one of many. And it's been a thrilling experience for me to be able to collaborate in such a way that I look at the book, I can't recall at all who wrote which sentence. I just simply don't know.
That's lovely. Let me interject a question here. I know Brad's going to get something to us something in a moment, but since you gentlemen brought this up, we've heard from Mike. I've heard from Mike certainly in our like especially email interchange over the past few years now what he thinks of you, Bob, as a mentor.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and most of it's pretty good, but I'm curious.
Oh gosh.
I'm kidding,
You just
but
you
but
wow.
I'm curious what you think. Not on the record, because it's only a podcast, but what do you think of Mike?
Oh
Um,
no. Oh no.
actually, I'm actually really
Oh,
curious. Like,
Jason.
no, Bob knows where I'm coming from. I'm actually really curious because it is apparent to
Mike, I want
me.
to apologize on behalf
No,
of the
no, it is
podcast.
apparent to me what Mike offers, and it does. It translates in the writing. Mike, you have easily some of the most beautiful writing I've
Yeah.
ever seen, and and I say this as a psychological scientist. Writing betrays the thought process. It doesn't tell you much when it's poor if the individual has lacked affordances, resources, etc. But when it's something special, that only gets there one way. And so that's clear to me. But I'm curious, and I've wondered about this almost since I met Mike. Bob, what made you think, yeah, I want to work with him? Because that's a serious, but really, that's a serious investment of resources and time. And now
Yes.
look at what it's doing.
It took about 5 minutes. I remember distinctly the first time we talked, interacted, and it was during COVID, and we had agreed to a Zoom time. Mike, I'm sure you remember this. And I had gotten into the habit of going these extremely long walks on the Sino Canal, which is right across from our house, very solitary walks. And I looked at the time, and I think, in fact, maybe Mike even I completely lost track of the time. So I was terrible. I mean, this is the worst thing
Oh.
a mentor can do to a potential young student to sort of to not show up. But then we had this conversation. It was great. And when Mike showed up at Carnegie, the thing that amazed me is that in spite of the fact that he could have worked with any one of a dozen different scientists at the laboratory with great effect, um, planetary scientist, one of the world's experts on planetary atmospheres and how they evolve and how they change and so forth. But he chose to work with me, and the sparks just flew the first time we sat down. So what I will say in a nutshell, what I think of Mike, I've probably taught in my career teaching, mentoring about 8,000 different young scientists. He is the one person of all those who I most wish I had been like when I was his age.
Wow.
It took me another 30 or 40 years to get to the state where I was open enough to think like the way he does right now, which is so broad, so integrated, so open to new ideas, not uncritical.
Mhm.
I mean, there's always that science skepticism and rigor, but just the ability to draw connections, and whether it's having been influenced by Star Trek all these years, which is a mind-opening,
Mhm.
expansive, embracing kind of thing, whether it's his is just is falling in love with astrobiology, which is an inherently very broad field. But Mike, I mean, it's just been a thrill to watch, and I'm hope I'm around for a bunch more years to be able to watch you kind of soar that way. You're going to make a real impact on a lot of people.
Wow. That's just so sweet to hear, Bob. I mean, you've heard me say this before, but on the record, on the podcast, Bob is the one scientist I want to grow up and be like, when I grow up, I want to be like Bob kind of thing. And
Oh,
it's because I think, Bob is this infectious joy, enthusiasm, excitement about everything that we're doing, and sees ways to push that to the next level. Go out and make things happen. Put on an 80-person workshop with amazing colleagues from around the world to come together and spur new ideas into action. Or put books together and just go off on a writing retreat and come back with a manuscript for a book and just have it there. I'm so inspired working with Bob, and I learn something new from him every single day, whether that's, about mineral evolution or how to just be a good teammate and a good leader, and also writing. Bob is an extraordinarily skilled writer, and I've learned so much about that craft from him, especially working with him on this book. And there's this one piece of feedback that I remember Bob giving me about, and I don't remember the English jargon, but it's like when you write and you just say this, but you don't say this what is that called, Bob? What
You lack an antecedent. You need to always include an antecedent.
the antecedent, exactly,
Yes.
right. And so now I never, lack that antecedent.
There you go. Well, we both learn from each other. That's one of the joys.
That's
But
wonderful.
we're also, I think, both learning from the much wider community.
Mhm.
The feedback we've had for these ideas, and in advance of Time's second arrow coming out, has been quite extraordinary. And Mike, in particular, I know this weekend he was working on an essay, which was just his, but it's brilliant, and it talks about how these ideas that we've had are now being used to propose new therapies for cancer by serious oncologists. I mean,
Wow.
so we're actually writing a paper with this whole bunch of people who are well known
Nice.
in the cancer research field. Whoever expected that? But Mike, your essay I thought was really uh, very lucid about how that came about.
Yeah,
That's
I
so
mean, it was
cool.
something that I wanted to be able to share again with the wider community. It's one thing to write academic papers, like the one that inspired Time Second Arrow and the one that we're working on with these oncologists meant for other scientists. But I also feel very passionate about sharing these ideas because, as we were discussing, 20 minutes ago, they have real impact in
Hmm.
everyday people's lives, right? And so this idea that you can take this framework of selection for function, of increasing function, as your basis for evolution means that you can apply evolutionary theory to things that aren't strictly under the purview of Darwinian evolution.
Hmm.
And cancer turns out is one of those things that ratchets up in complexity and function in a way that defies the tenets of Darwinian evolution. Cancers don't really have progeny that they pass on
Right.
heritable variations to. They just grow and then gain new functions and abilities, which are, in general, very devastating to one's
Mhm.
body. But if you understand the evolution of cancer through this framework, then you can propose all completely new, novel frameworks for therapy,
Mhm.
and trapping cancers in evolutionary cycles and things like this that are just mind-boggling. And I hope one day end up saving a bunch of people's lives. And if that is the outcome of my career as an astrobiologist, even if we never find life elsewhere, but we just end up helping life here on Earth, that's more than enough for me.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to see. Because if evolution is a universal characteristic from the Big Bang,
Yeah.
atoms and elements and isotopes and stars and planets and life and then societies and all the things that come out of that, we can talk about, as we said, art and music and language and then computer code and AI evolving. If this is a universal theme and if there is a universal law or laws that describe how they behave, it's going to have profound implications. Because the thing about a law, a natural law, it describes, it explains,
Mhm.
it quantifies, and ultimately it predicts. That's what a law does. The laws of motion or the laws of gravity do that. And we're getting hints that that might be true for this law of increasing functional information, this law that's based on information. The information behaves in a quantifiable and predictable way
Wow.
in evolving systems. So that's why people at Google are looking at these ideas in terms of their AI systems. It's why cancer specialists are looking at it, and linguists are looking at it, and historians are looking at it, and we're just amazed at the way these ideas had just been. People have been just. Darwin doesn't always work. Darwin is brilliant, but it is a special case of a more general trend in the cosmos, and a trend that applies to non-living and artificial symbolic systems, as well as the living systems where Darwin's model works so beautifully.
For those that aren't,
Yeah.
gentlemen, for those that aren't scientists per se, um, is this book accessible for them?
Yeah, we wrote it with the general public as our intended
Excellent.
audience. Yeah, so you won't find very many equations
No big
in this
words.
book at all, or big words.
Big words are
Um,
fine. I wanted to make sure those that because I want to ask Bob about music real quick because I want to be cognizant of time. But we have people that come from different angles, and just by you talking about like Google and talking about biology and things like that, I want people to understand that this is accessible and it's something that should be looked at from all different angles. Um, and information and like the information sciences like you
Yeah.
just talked about.
Sure.
So if I could hijack it for 1 minute. So
Got to come
Bob,
back to
even
the
before you,
trumpets. Yeah.
what's that?
Got to
No,
come
no,
back to
I'm
the
even going to
trumpets.
go before that. So
Okay.
before that, because Bob, your history with mineralogy and all that, you started young with music,
I did.
with piano and violin and even trumpet. How, maybe this is too broad of a question, so I apologize in advance, but how do you think that your passion and background in music really kind of played into your experience and your work in science and everything like that? How do you think that yeah, I know that's a broad
No,
question,
but it's
but
a great question, Brad, and I've actually thought about this because it's may surprise you. A lot of people said, "Oh, you play the trumpet symphonically, you play in orchestras, you must be very creative." And I say, "No. The last thing you want to do if you're a trumpet player in a symphony orchestra is be creative. You play the right note, the right pitch, the right volume, when the conductor says, not too long, not too short, all this stuff. I mean, it's a discipline. But what playing music did for me is I spent hours and hours and hours in breaks and rehearsals with incredibly smart people who were not scientists who asked me scientific questions. And very, very early on in that process, I learned clever ways, metaphors, different ways to make complex science things just accessible. Just saying, look, we all experience this. So if I were saying to a musician, well, what does this law of evolution have to do with me? I said, well, think about music. There's all these different musical notes, and you can range them in just combinatorially huge numbers of different ways. And most of them just sound like nothing, or you wouldn't want to listen to them. And sometimes you get something that sort of sounds like a melody. And once in a rare while, someone will come up with just a gorgeous melody and harmony that sticks with you. You can't get it out of your brain because it's so beautiful and it's so inspiring. And that's a selection process. You have a system in which there are lots of interacting particles, in this case, musical notes, that they can be arranged in vast numbers of configuration, and the composer comes up and selects those very, very tiny fraction of all those configurations that makes a beautiful sound, it makes beautiful music. That's what music's all about. It's what we love about it because it moves us in ways that's hard to understand. But a random group of notes just doesn't do that. And so here we have a selection mechanism, which is exactly what happens with elements in minerals or cells in living systems or lines of computer code in AI. It's always just finding the right combination that works.
I played trumpet too, but not professionally. I played from 5th grade through 12th grade, and I
Okay.
think I took a different lesson from it completely, which is that I actually really struggled with the trumpet, especially starting out. But it taught me resilience. It taught me that things can be hard, but eventually you'll learn how to do it if you put in the work and you put in the time. And I feel like that lesson from playing music, from playing in band, has stuck with me throughout my entire life. And there were definitely times in the development of these ideas where it was hard. Speaking to philosophers is hard. And trying to get a noise out of a trumpet is almost like, I struggled the same way trying to understand what these philosophers were saying. But, that kind of belief that, if I put in the work and if I paid attention, if I practiced enough at this, new interface of science and philosophy, we'd be able to get to where we need to go. And also the other thing that you learn from band, which is, kind of beautiful in a way, is that it takes a whole bunch of diverse talents and instruments to put together a symphony. I mean, you don't have 80 trumpets in the symphony. You have, a handful, and then the rest are the other instruments. And so when we constructed our team, we didn't have 8 astrobiologists. We had, a couple of astrobiologists and then physicists, computer scientists, philosophers, etc. And that was really important to shaping time second arrow as well.
I think
could this be both of your, I know Mike, it's maybe a little young for this, but could this be your magnum opus, time second arrow?
Time will tell. We think there's something profound there.
Mhm.
We're also, as the book says, we're keenly aware we could be wrong. We could have missed something. We could be fooling ourselves, or this could just be the tip of a very crude description of a much more subtle aspect of nature. I think it's causing a lot of conversation. It's causing people to think, which in and of itself is valuable.
Yeah.
But whether 50 years from now, people say, oh yeah, Wong, Hazen, they did that book, Time Second Arrow, or it's just, there are copies that are sort of in the dustbin, forever ignored after that. We have no way of knowing. We gave it our best shot. We'll continue working on it. There are other papers, maybe other books to come, that follow up on this one. It's very possible, but it's not for us to say.
Right.
That sort of takes a lot of the weight off, doesn't it, Mike?
It sure does.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us this evening. We know you're busy. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Jason, Brad, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, always a joy.
That was as just unbelievable and fun and illuminating and awesome as I expected it to be.
We're going to make a scientist out of you yet.
Probably not at my age, but ultimately a scientist fan already there. And it is just fascinating to be in proximity to people who are making these discoveries and coming up with these hypotheses and things that are paradigm shifting and changing.
And this really could be, actually, that you're not exaggerating.
Yeah. And so just to be able to talk to folks like this and to hear it directly from them and to hear their thoughts and to just kind of get stream of consciousness from them on this type of stuff is, to me, kind of like it's like life highlights to me. These are things that I'll remember. And going back to what you said about how we get folks like this, to be honest with you too, let's not forget that in many cases for us, we get to meet folks on this podcast who we were fans of, and we luckily get to use this podcast as a vehicle to bring in folks that we probably wouldn't necessarily have a chance to talk to otherwise.
I mean, we say this all the time, and literally we say this all the time to each other, but we've said this too many times in the podcast while recording. I have no idea why so many people have been willing to hang out with us, but yet, like, those discussions are like, they'll be the highlight of the week. Like, it's just wonderful.
And we'll talk more about this during our 5-year episode
we will.
That's coming up. But more to come on that. Why don't we head over to Loon
Cafe? Bob and Mike, one more time. Thank you so much. We just kudos on a beautiful book and Godspeed on its effect on the debate and on the discussions.
And how broad it's hitting. I mean, just listening to Mike's story about how it's affecting in cancer research and things like that, and how it's spread, the effect on it'll have in AI, and how it could spread these discussions, how it'll affect in business and things like that. It's going to permeate. It's going to permeate beyond just hard sciences. So.
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So.
All right.
Loon Cafe. So.
Yes.
I think we have another, we've had this recently. We'll have this again. Mutual topic.
Yes, we do.
We should talk a little bit about a book where you had a little bit of a hand in it.
Yeah.
Star Trek's 23rd Century Source Book.
Yeah, so what is the form? Star Trek Adventure, second edition, 23rd Century Campaign.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. I'm not sure why it's a
Yeah.
campaign book, but that doesn't matter. And it is a beautiful. Now this is a beautiful. Now this has been out in print for how long have we had the print? Several weeks or more already.
Yeah, it's probably it came out before the holidays, right? We got it
Yeah,
before the holidays.
yeah. Okay,
So,
so maybe a month-ish, a month or
yeah.
well, by the time this drops, maybe 2 months or so.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, we had yeah we'd seen the inside bits and pieces before that. Um, everybody, I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but we had meant to get into it a little more, and so we're going to take a few minutes and do that now, just because of what we think about it.
Yeah. Now this is the first, let's not minimize it. This is the first RPG book where you had a contribution, where you did some of the writing on
Yes,
some of the um,
I
um,
have some sidebars.
the
Yeah,
sidebars
yeah.
on all that.
It's very. I want to stress here of like I said last episode in the Loon Cafe. I literally did the least of everybody on the writing team. So let's just be really clear about that. But for
Yes, but
me, it was ideal. It was absolutely ideal. And I will always be grateful to Jim Johnson for asking if I'd be interested. He had an
but
idea for something he liked,
you now have a writing credit in a Star Trek Adventures
which is
RPG book.
absolutely incredible and um, absolutely incredible. Um, yeah, it's pretty cool. But also, uh, especially coming after our chat with Bob and Mike, this is a heck of a book.
Yes.
This canvasses the 23rd century. So basically all of Trek through the TOS movies.
Yes.
And it does it beautifully while building soft canon and otherwise reflecting hard canon.
Yep. And growing up being a TOS movie guy and then watching the TOS series, being introduced to it by my mom, um, I was ecstatic for it. I cried when the Enterprise blew up in Star Trek 3
Oh,
multiple
that was
times.
huge.
You
Huge.
know, huge.
Yeah, it
Um,
was. It was, I
yes,
mean, for those who came after our generation, you cannot overstate what a big deal it was to see the Enterprise destroyed.
destroyed, and to not have an Enterprise anymore.
Hmm.
That was a big deal. So, um, so, you know, from my perspective, having now, going back to first edition, I'm looking over on my shelf. We had quadrant source books, we had division
And
source
I
books.
believe you have many of those books, do you not?
I have all of those books. Um, and then we had like source books from the Discovery era. We had source books, obviously the Shackleton book, but a book that encompasses that whole time period, the 23rd century.
It's significant.
It's yes, and it just a phenomenal undertaking by the STA team, Jim
Oh yeah,
and
I mean, and you look at the writing credits, like they,
yeah,
and it's really
Jim,
neat. Yeah.
Michael, Al,
Hmm.
guys who've been on the show with
Yep,
us,
Nathan, who we still have to
Nathan.
get on the show.
Yes.
Um, uh, yeah, Nathan Dowdell. I'm looking over at my shelf too, which I admittedly has many, many fewer books of RPGs in general, but the ones I have, I really enjoy. And I'm looking and I'm thinking, okay, what are some of my favorites? Well, the I mean, you can. Well, I love the second edition core rule book. That's
Hmm.
really well done. Of course, back with first edition, Utopia Planitia. I mean, come on,
Oh,
they gave
yeah.
us a starship book, and then with the what did they call it? The technic, not the technical guide. What was the? I'm blocking. Sorry, the expansion kit for 2E, where they provided more ships. It was the soft cover, the paperback. Um, I will think of it in a moment. Man, what is
What
that
am I?
called? Let
What
me
am I?
let me pull our files right now. I'm thinking of the of course, I'm thinking of the game toolkit. See, it's
Oh,
not a
yes.
that title doesn't make sense to me. The
Yes.
game toolkit is basically, in my mind, Utopia Planitia updated expansion. And so like
Yes.
things like that, I'm sorry, I have spent so many hours poring over those ships. And of course, the tech manual is awesome. The Explorer's Guide is great. Okay, the 23rd century campaign book to me is fundamentally different. It's not any longer. It's brief. It's what, like 140 some pages. So they didn't have any additional page count they could burn. The sheer amount of information and not game mechanics. The sheer like if you are into Trek even a little, you can just pick this up and read it, and it's sort of ridiculous what you can get.
This is something that I'm noticing, and we talk about this. I'm going to break the fourth wall. We're going to talk.
We
We
never
talk
do that.
about this. Yeah, we talk about this with, um, when we talked about um, the planets, the species guide.
Yeah.
Um,
Last time.
where
Yes, exactly.
there's not a lot of mechanics in it. They give you all of that in the core rulebook. You get a lot of the mechanics, everything you need in the core rulebook, and
Mhm.
these supplemental guides are truly like lit as RPG. They
They
are
are
books that,
truly,
yes.
yes,
And this is something that Jim has said on the show, recorded.
they're really
That's some
intentional about.
They're intentional, that these are books that are for the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. They're branded as such,
Mhm.
but they also can be, in effect, coffee table books that you can just pick up and look at and read through and gawk at and
Speaking
everything
of
in
which,
between.
the
You know,
somehow the covers of these books are getting the cover art is getting design is getting better and better.
yes,
They're so engaging. Like 23rd century, that's just it is a beautiful cover, wonderful use of color palette. Um, man, now I think to pivot a little, I think to complete the game line, we're gonna need to see Star Trek Adventures 2E cookbook.
well, I am still of the mind that there needs to be, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again.
Oh no.
There needs to be two additional source books that need to come out.
Yep.
One, Fashion of the Federation source book,
Yeah, you keep coming back to that.
and two, the Klingon calisthenics source book. Um, I think
Yes.
with those two,
I have
I
made
think
chamomile
that,
tea.
yes, I
Yes.
think those two, swords are fun. Um, I think with those two books, I think they can be done. I don't think they need to publish anything else. I think a Fashion of
Because
the
you couldn't go
Federation,
farther than that, right? I mean,
you
where could you
can't go
possibly
any
take
further.
it?
Jim, you've heard it here first. Michael, you've heard it here. Al, you've heard it here. Those two done. And I think you're set. I really do. I don't think you need anything else. I think that's all there is. Um,
However, if you
yes.
do opt to not go that way, guys, we will still respect it and gladly purchase those
Oh, and I'll
books.
purchase anything that comes out, of
It's
course. I mean,
true.
I mean, we're pre-ordering, although it seems these days as the guy who there's the guy who introduced you to the game, you're the one that seems to get the pre-order in before me. Um, on these
I
last couple
to I
games, you
well,
know,
okay, so I mean, I feel
you're in front of your computer,
I
like,
feel like the luckiest guy in the world because like I told you on air last episode in Loon Cafe, I was on my phone taking a break from working on a paper, and I saw a message come through that hey, the species guide surprise is now available, which we didn't know anything about. And I mean, literally, I saw that I'm like, let's go over and take a look.
yeah,
Um, but with the 23rd century campaign book, that one, as a writer, they sent me. And
yeah,
we need to pause too because uh a number of game publishers have been very good to us these
very
past
good
five
to us.
years.
Yes,
Uh, Especially Modifius, who has has, because they know of our love for the game, they know we're going to talk about it on
Mm-hmm.
Dice and Mind happily, and critically. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I know it all sounds like a love fest. Don't get me wrong. There are definitely things I dislike about the game, but they are minor,
Mm-hmm.
and subsumed by all the good. But they've sent us a number of books these past few years so that we can really get into them and talk about them. And we are deeply, deeply grateful.
Yeah, they know we're not as they would say, we're not homers for the game. Um,
Mm-mm.
and Jim knows that we've been, our friends at Green Ronin have been very gracious with us. Troy at Green Ronin and Malcolm at
Mm-hmm.
Green Ronin,
Mm.
Malcolm, is well overdue on
Oh
and
yeah,
getting
way overdue. Yeah,
way
we'll be in
overdue on
touch.
joining us.
Yep.
Um, but um, Sophie May at Modifius
Yep.
has been a
Oh,
real
she's
friend to
incredible.
us.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and many thanks to her. But yeah, ordering the
But we are also
or
so happy to send our money to these teams and these companies
oh
who
sure.
do such wonderful work. I mean, we haven't said this in a long time, and maybe it'll come up on our 5-year retrospective, but it still feels to me like we are living in a golden age of tabletop role playing.
Oh, absolutely we are with the I mean, yeah,
Hmm.
let's table that
We're gonna
because
table it. That maybe that's where we're going.
that'll be a great
Yeah.
that'll be a great topic as part of our 5-year discussion.
Yeah. All right,
So,
everybody. We've gone a little longer than we expected on this one. But you know the deal. We get into something and we can't help ourselves, especially when it's so interesting.
because we are so brief in our topics.
Yes, brief and engaging. All right, everybody. You know the deal. Be well, stay well. We will see you in a couple weeks.